Good morning. This is Beverly Gordon, and I am going to be talking to you about my work working with what the earth yields up, reconfigured. Welcome to my world, that meeting place of art and nature and imagination, the place where natural detritus, bones, deer hooves, seed pods, bird beaks, and so on, where all of that is given another kind of life. Most of the materials are throwaways. Left to themselves, they will rot and return to the earth. I interrupt their natural process and reanimate them, recombining and reconfiguring them to a new kind of embodiment. The sculptural forms that are created are surprising, sometimes haunting, sometimes funny, sometimes disturbing, sometimes endearing. There is an intimacy in this work, both because of the small scale and because every step of the process involves a close-up relationship with the materials and with the earth itself. Ultimately, the pieces call attention to the amazing, ingenious forms and myriad faces of nature. The work keeps leading me deeper and deeper. It entails a continual series of encounters and explorations in the natural world. I think of it as an overall natural adventure filled with experiences, embodied experiences that teach me about ecology, seasonal cycles, habitat, biology, landscape, and form. These all carry over into the making and reconfiguration process. The adventure begins with collecting, finding or encountering the bones or other materials. This is an all-consuming experience, often obsessive, that involves both hunting and gathering. My days and often my travels are shaped by a constant search of the environment. There is nothing that makes my spirit soar more than walking the beach, looking for what has been sent up by the sea. These bird heads are among the many that I brought back from the west coast of Mexico. Looking, searching for such gifts from the shoreline environment is an open-ended process, one that's very hard to stop. Oh, there might be just another one around the corner, an even better one, so keep looking. But the looking becomes very intentional, very focused, where one learns to separate figure and ground and become completely attuned to the environment and what it has to offer. Here is a search for skate egg cases. Those are on the right, on the bottom. That's one example. And these are sometimes called mermaids' purses. While at first you don't see too many, my friend and I collected about 1,000 that afternoon on the Jersey Shore. My days may be shaped and colored by the collecting needs. In early spring, I make a visit to an area in the Arboretum where I know to look for skeletonized leaves. I had observed for several seasons that the magnolia leaves skeletonized well, and one could find them after the snows had melted but before anyone had mowed the grass. The last time I went, it was a dreary, gray day, but having to zero in on the almost invisible spots on the ground made my spirit soar. This mirror frame, which, sorry, but it does not photograph well, also illustrates that very focused looking and the relationship with a particular place and season. I was on the beach in Long Island, New York, also in somewhat dreary cold weather. It wasn't a day to sit still and soak in the sun, so instead I bundled up and combed the beach for hours, searching for and picking up one particular type of shell, actually just the hinges of well-worn clamshells. I have read that some of the shell bits that are repeatedly tossed up by the shore can be decades, possibly even centuries old. These shell hinges are incredibly strong, as indeed they must be when we think how the mollusk uses it to slam shut in case of danger. The wonderful thing one discovers when telescoping one's vision to something small like this is the continual variety in natural form. All of the clams are of the same species, all formed in the same way. but there is endless color variation and subtle difference among them. It's not possible to really understand this when just walking the beach and taking in the whole environment. It only happens when honing in on particularized forms and observing them closely. Some of my collecting days are devoted to clams, some to skate egg cases, or something else. This can all take place quite close to home. I've taken hundreds of kayak trips in my figurative backyard, Lake Wingra, where I've become attuned to very small creatures, especially the snails that feed on the plants in shallow water. I've had many somatic experiences with these trips on the lake, but perhaps the activities that give the most life to these trips are all the times I reach down into the weeds or the water or the lily pads where this little snail carcasses get caught after they rise to the surface. I know the parts of the lake where one can find the bigger snails or the browner ones. Here is the take I collected on a single afternoon's paddle. There are many rituals. Carrying them home in a cup, carefully washing them out, the deep alluvial mud, and sometimes the remnants of little snail bodies washing down my sink. The shells are small, delicate, just a bit of calcium really, that can be easily squashed between the fingertips. No one is marveling over these. In fact, no one usually even notices them. But to me they are endearing, each a patiently gathered and processed element, another resource for creative revisioning. They resonate for me. They are a taste of a summer day, these slowly moving, mostly unseen mollusks, whose shells sink down again into the mud and eventually emptied, float up to the surface. Someone looking at them in a reconfigured sculpture might start to really see them, their whiteness, their fragility, the grace of their Fibonacci spirals. Lake Wingra also has clams, which grow surprisingly large. I love hunting these, always putting back live clams so they can once again burrow in the sand. As I look closely in the shallow parts of the lake bottom for these well-hidden neighbors, I have new discoveries. I have discovered the aspects of underwater life such as fish nests, like these. They're holes hollowed out by fishes about to lay eggs. One sees them in the early spring. Hunting and gathering is just the first part of collecting. After the materials are acquired, the curatorial aspects kick in. That's the organizing, the learning about, the displaying. Aren't they beautiful? Just pieces of my working process. There is an aesthetic pleasure at every step, but it goes well beyond that. One is led outward to learn more about the collection. In this case, it's an investigation of why the natural forms are as they are. Why are there such different types of feathers on a single turkey, and how do they help the bird survive? How does a crab use and molt its shell? How do its eyes work? Why are there so many different forms? Well, here are more crabs. Forms of crabs, forms of gourds. What are the conditions under which different forms of gourds grow? All this leads us into the, quote, intelligence of nature, which is vast. And it makes us aware of what belongs in a particular environment and what does not. I was delighted to find so many tiny clams in the White River in Arkansas. The environment seemed to be teeming with life. But my attitude changed completely when I learned this type of clam was actually an invasive species that had literally wiped out the native clams that were formerly used to make mother-of-pearl buttons. Getting interested in a particular material also leads me to other people. I got interested in sea sponges, which you can see at the top of both of these images. And that brought me to the lives of Greek-American sea sponge divers who live in the west coast of Florida. The investigations that I do thus go far beyond natural history and ecosystems and open up into social and cultural histories as well. More sea sponges here. The next part involves the investigation of learning how to process the materials, and since I work with so many different ones, my learning curve is very high. What are the ways to preserve a sea sponge? Sometimes trial and error produces unintended consequences. The dark color of the sponges coming from the top of this piece resulted from a chemical reaction when I used peroxide to clean them. The sponges darkened and grew brittle rather than lightening up. Each of these materials involves different processes and different questions. Which kind of glue might work in a given case? What's the best way to encapsulate and perhaps arrest in time what is ultimately a decaying and ephemeral material? My trial and error discoveries become part of the greater adventure and the artistic process. I have learned how to safely clean and bleach bones. Strong peroxide works well. To dry out organic matter with borax, I learned that trick from deer hunters. To fix skeletonized leaves with acrylic coatings. To process bull kelp so it doesn't rot. I was so excited about kelp and its possibilities that I made what amounted to a pilgrimage to the Oregon coast to study with a woman working with the material as a kind of vegetable leather. This is a scene from working with the material at her house. These pieces all incorporate kelp. Here they're kind of ring beads. I also worked with a Florida woman who taught me how to recognize and process palms and other tropical materials. And I did a mini residency at the Bone Room in Berkeley, a place which bills itself as a natural history store. The proprietor knows all about processing bones and animal parts, and my short apprenticeship was a great adventure. Here's some more about some of the natural materials and all they evoke. Horseshoe crabs and crab tails. Oh, these bring forth memories from my childhood, the strange creatures that felt as fully as prehistoric as they actually are. The incredible moment on the little Florida peninsula that had become a crab graveyard. Dozens of bodies washed up on top of each other, making my way through the piles, tempted to take whole carcasses, but too much to carry, too smelly, just too much. So, settling for pulling off the sharp but portable and sturdy tails, technically called tensons, but stymied sometimes by the muscle-like flesh that attaches them when they aren't dried out enough. Usually having to twist them off until the moment of give, trying to protect my hands but becoming very scratched up. Other days, watching the crabs come ashore in Ocracoke mating, those tensons swishing back and forth as they swim, and yet again on Isla Holbox in Mexico, where the shells were softer, probably just molted, and often their tails had already come off, ripe for the picking. Wrapping them carefully in my suitcase and transporting them home. Later, with my stash, washing them, removing remaining flesh, laying them out on a towel to dry, and then pouring out the inevitable sand that lodges inside. Sorting the tails, reading about these creatures, their 110 pair of eyes, some compound like a dragonfly's, and the importance of their blood, an extract of which is used by the pharmaceutical and medical device industries to ensure that their products, like intravenous drugs and vaccines, are free of bacterial contamination. In ancient Japan, warriors who honorably sacrificed their lives in battle were said to be reborn as horseshoe crabs. Their shells, samurai helmets, eternally crossing the bottom of the sea. Sadly, these animals are quite endangered now due to shrinking habitat and their very attractiveness to industry. I mentioned learning about preservation from deer hunters. This is all part of a long developing relationship with deer parts, a journey that has also led me into the cultural milieu of taxidermists and those who process wild game. It brought me to a study of deer anatomy, habitat, and diet. One of my adventures was at the Deer and Turkey Hunters Exposition, where I took this picture. And this adventure led me to an embodied understanding of muscle, fiber, bone, and keratin. I began with an interest in deer hooves, as I knew about Native American deer hoof rattles, and I had the idea of going during hunting season to deer processors asking me to save the legs that they cut off. No one in non-native culture at least wants these legs. They're thrown out, sheer excess. I tried different strategies to cut off hooves, and I have wonderful stories just about that. But I learned the way that to really remove them is to boil them down. What followed were extremely visceral experiences, carrying the surprisingly heavy legs home, cleaning them, and then boiling them for hours on end. First in my own kitchen, and later, when I got smart, outside in my backyard. That brought somatic knowledge, an amazing discovery of all that's inside the leg. The long bones that are inside the whole long leg. The triangular ones that are inside the hoof. These are the ones that dig into the earth and leave the diamond marks that we track. Also the delicate connecting bones. I was so taken into that part of the deer body, feeling almost kinesthetically how they may feel, touching the earth, springing forwards, silent. There is in my own cell memory now the overpowering gamey smell of the dissolving skin and gristle, the greasy feel of the dissolving fat, and the amazement at the huge amount of soft tissue that wraps around the bone. I am in awe of this design and its astonishing beauty. My figures that come from this engagement feel as if they hold the presence of the deer. This image shows the dew claws on the back of the leg, the smaller little hooves, hoof-like things that are behind them, and a piece made with dew claws. One of my masks uses deer hooves and wild turkey feathers. Since I have encountered these very animals together in the same place, they feel as if they fit perfectly. It's hard to stop talking about these encounters. Here's another. Here we're looking at a spiny porcupine or pufferfish, which I first encountered in Mexico. I hadn't yet learned the boiling down technique that I just described with the bones. The beach in Florida yielded a smaller variety of these pufferfish after a red tide brought many dead animals onto shore. Then I had a better sense of what to do. Clean the fish, dry it out, and then boil what remained. The bone easily separated from its 2 layers of skin, the bones being the spines here. Again, a marvel. How completely well protected this animal is. How brilliant is the design. I also have a love affair with the sea robin, an underappreciated junk fish found in the Atlantic. I literally love to play with these, to contemplate their individual variety, their personalities. Just working with them becomes an artistic endeavor of its own. Again, there are the sea robin heads married with turkey feathers. There is yet another level of discovery or adventure when the pieces are complete. I have hesitated to name them because I want people to make their own associations. I find that some, especially the figures I call tiaras or earth beings, can almost act as a Rorschach test of a sort, as each brings out something in different viewers. Some people find them disturbing, as I said, especially when there is a direct confrontation with decay and the non-pretty side of nature. Some relate to them primarily as dolls. Some go deep with me into the natural form and its mysteries. I've also found that I can go into what I really do consider a spiritual level with these figures, asking them questions about themselves and discovering in the answers that come through aspects of them that I wasn't even aware of consciously. I firmly believe these are related to the materials themselves and the energies they carry. As I've said, I play with my materials. I've been dyeing bones in kelp with black walnut, for example, which is so abundant around us and so transformative. So many nuts, so fragrant on my stove. The piece on the right has dyed bone on the top and dyed kelp tubes on the arms. This is leftover dye from Easter egg dyeing, which in this case is applied to felt and gut-covered bone. I collect pumpkin stems too, and sometimes color them and slice them, or I mix them with other materials. I can play with sand dollars, delighting in their open-ended shapes and possibilities. I'm writing a book about my encounters with these materials and all that entails. It will include the collecting experiences and initial encounters with the materials in their environments, the serendipitous finds that I have when I look carefully with the awakened eye, and the ones that emerge when I'm already trained to know what to look for. It will include the always new challenges, frustrations, and satisfactions of processing diverse materials, and the ways I deepen my intimacy with the natural world through them. The bird on the left in this image used to have feathers on its head, but some kind of critter got to that and ate them off completely, leaving it with just bald skin. My book will also include travel stories about my constant discoveries. I found this tree in a botanical garden in Hawaii. And I will talk about the constant surprises that are yielded up. The bobcat bones that are from the jaw, in the jaw of the bobcat on this mask, were from a skeleton that I spotted in the woods by the side of the road on a causeway in Sarasota, Florida. There were literally thousands of people passing by as they walked to a very Tony art fair. I happened to look over to the side and caught this, and it called to me, I think, It's my message from the earth. Look for me. Pay attention. There I am. The book will include the aha moments when I uncover new cultural stories and my ever richer relationship with all of these ecosystems, all of these life cycles, the spiritual understandings, the literal moments of deeper communion when these reanimated beings help engender that. All of these energies infuse this work. I hope this glimpse into my work helps infuse you too. Helps you start looking at the world through this lens, even a little bit. It's an interesting perspective, leading you to surprising new places. Enjoy the journey. Take away with you the joy and profundity of the world we live in, what the earth gives us. Expand your vision. Have fun. If you wish to give me any kind of feedback, I would be very happy to receive it. Gordon at Whisk Edu. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, and have fun.